everybody, welcome to the channel. I'm Jay Tanner, and today I wanted to talk about She-Hulk. I've been a She-Hulk fan for a really long time. It was even one of the first comic books I've ever picked up. She's had quite a few runs over the years, and they vary in tone, and has appeared in multiple other medias. But as a longtime fan, I haven't really been impressed with her outings in recent years, both in the comic books and other media. Recently, she was introduced to the MCU with her own show on Disney+. I was actually hoping for a long time that She-Hulk would get a movie about her. The Hulk has two movies, but they both happened before the MCU started, and while the MCU does reference those movies, Hulk never actually got his own movie in the franchise, so I thought a good way to have a Hulk-centered movie that didn't retread old ground from the previous ones would be to introduce She-Hulk and focus on the dynamic between Bruce and Jen. But instead we got this show. But as a fan of the character, I have to say I'm disappointed. For some reason, they've been forcing her into some kind of competition with Bruce over whose life sucks more, and it's weird. People already write off She-Hulk as some kind of derivative Miss Male character to begin with, which isn't fair, but now they're practically making her whole character revolve around Bruce, when she was already pretty unique and interesting on her own, and it's a real shame to see. The show addresses this in episode 2 where Jen has a line about being seen as derivative when people start calling her She-Hulk, but a good way to avoid that is to let her stand on her own and not constantly compare the two. In the comics, she got her name because that's what the bad guys called her and she owned it. Here she doesn't even get to decide her own identity. That's what people on the local news were calling her, and she and her friends say that it's stupid, and later She-Hulk says that she doesn't want the name but she knows it's going to stick anyway. It just doesn't have the same impact. Jen has existed for decades independently of the Hulk, and she has so much to offer as a character, so it's really disappointing when people write her off like this, and it's even more disappointing to see them do it in the actual shows and comics involving her. I think this show would have worked better if it was on Netflix instead of Disney+, and be a part of that street-level universe along with Luke Cage and Jessica Jones, among others. They changed her origin for this show. I came across this article where the head writer explains that Disney felt her original origin story didn't fit the vibe they wanted to go for. Yeah, this probably would have worked better on Netflix. So they only reference it in a passing comment, but the rewrite they gave her just isn't as compelling or interesting in my opinion. In the comics, Bruce goes to visit his cousin Jennifer Walters, a lawyer in Los Angeles. The two are really close as children, but they haven't seen each other in a very long time. Jen explains she's defending a man who she believes is being framed for murder by the mob, and unbeknownst to the two of them, they're being tailed by said mobsters, and they shoot Jen when they get the chance, in broad daylight, with a witness. Probably not the smartest idea. Bruce takes her inside where he's afraid that she'll bleed out before the paramedics come, so he gives her an emergency blood transfusion. Later in the hospital, the mobsters sneak into her room, disguised as doctors. They try to kill her again, but the transfusion ended up giving her the ability to transform too, and she's able to fight them off. As She-Hulk, she chases them outside, where they beg her to spare them, which is really cheap considering the fact that they were totally trying to kill her before, but she gets them to admit that her client is innocent and they were the ones responsible for the murder, and she leaves them in the hands of police officers. She sneaks back into the hospital where she contemplates what just happened. She views She-Hulk as a monster and figures that she has to hide her, but as Jen develops as a character, she ends up finding She-Hulk empowering and decides not to have a secret identity, incorporating She-Hulk into her everyday life. Unlike Bruce, who loses his mind when he transforms, She-Hulk is able to retain her wits, and Jen even practices law as She-Hulk. She's basically the opposite of Bruce in that regard, who's been forced into this extreme case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and forced him to live largely in isolation in order to protect himself and others, especially considering the fact that he's constantly being hunted by the military. I think it would have been really cool to get a courtroom drama superhero show where Jen is taking on the mob, and I could have crossed over with Daredevil since both Jennifer Walters and Matthew Murdock are lawyers and vigilantes, but approach it differently, and that dynamic could have been really interesting. Matt is in this show, but if I'm being totally honest, I don't have a lot of faith in these writers. First of all, the writers admitted to the fact that they don't actually know how to write courtroom drama, which is weird. If Disney is going to produce a show about a lawyer, you'd think they would screen for someone with that kind of experience. But honestly, I feel like the writing overall is pretty mid. The show is billed as a comedy, but I didn't find it very funny, and to be fair, comedy is subjective, but I felt like it relied too much on referential humor, and some of the comedy rubbed me the wrong way, but I'll get to that in a minute. The characters are pathetic compared to previous portrayals. Then there's the CGI. I never liked the way Smart Hulk looks, and he spends most of his screen screen time as Smart Hulk, and the CGI effect on She-Hulk isn't any better. Half the time she doesn't even look like the same character. I also thought a lot of it was boring, episode 2 in particular, and the dramatic scenes just weren't that impressive. I'm also not sure if they actually read the comics they're referencing. When discussing Jen's original origin story, she says she doesn't believe the MCU Hulk would turn Jen into a Hulk, because he sees it as a curse. But Bruce didn't know that the transfusion would turn her into a Hulk. Once she's in the hospital, he runs away, expecting to never see her again for her own protection, and he was completely unaware of any change in her. The original Bruce had the same opinion about the Hulk, and he also wouldn't intentionally turn her into one, although I do question if it came down to a life or death situation or not. But either way, the comic makes it a point to note that he does not know this is happening. They reference the comics loosely when they're talking about the show, but I can't help but wonder if they actually read them or if someone gave them a synopsis. Jen's new origin is that she was driving with Bruce, but then this random spaceship shows up out of nowhere and forces her off the road. They're both injured in the crash, and when Jen tries to pull Bruce out of the wreckage, his blood accidentally mixes with hers, and that's how she becomes She-Hulk. Yeah, it's pretty lackluster compared to most superhero origins, including hers, but this is what we get. She transforms instantaneously, panics, and runs off into the woods. Then she wanders to a bar where she tries to get cleaned up. Other women come to the bathroom and notice how messed up she looks. They immediately assume she's a victim of domestic violence, which is a very serious situation, and I'm really uncomfortable with how they handled it. Instead of getting her medical attention, which she obviously needs, they give her a makeover. She has to ask them to borrow a phone to call Bruce, and then instead of waiting with her, they just send her out into the night alone. That is so irresponsible. For some reason, Jen never told them that she was in a car accident, so they just assume that she has some kind of stalker, and they could still be around for all they know. Plus, it's the middle of the night by a seedy bar, you don't know who could be around. And sure enough, she gets approached by a group of guys. Apparently, according to the head writer, she had to fight to keep this scene in, and it was one of the most important in the whole show, which was surprising because I had a very different reaction to it. This totally goes against the girl code, but this was apparently intended to show the solidarity between women, but it's supposed to show the differences between how women react to a situation and how men react to a situation, where the women were supposedly supportive, and the men start hitting on her, but it's not really the same situation. The women found her when she was bloodied and battered after a car accident, and the men are seeing her after her bar makeover. They shouldn't be acting that way to begin with. She said she wasn't interested, so they should just move on, but hopefully that wouldn't be their reaction to someone in that kind of state. This just really fell flat for me. I don't like the way this show approaches gender, which is unfortunate because that's one of the things they chose to focus on. They act like being a woman sucks, and some of the hot takes they have are questionable in my opinion. Jen has this unfortunate habit of talking down to others. One of the most infamous scenes is when Jen tries to explain that she has control of her anger, despite the fact that her actions prove otherwise, and she tells Bruce that she controls her anger infinitely more than he does, simply because as a woman she has challenges that he never had to experience. And while it's true that women do experience unique challenges, and I think it's okay to address that, but she can address that without dismissing somebody else's trauma and struggles. Overall, Jen has it pretty good. She has a good job, supportive friends, she doesn't have money troubles, she lives in a safe neighborhood in this really nice apartment, and as She-Hulk, people aren't horrified by her. Sure, she might get some mean comments online, but when Bruce transformed, people tried to kill him. They feared and hated him. Meanwhile, the majority of people here cheer her on. Bruce has been hunted by the military, used as a weapon which resulted in him killing innocent people, forced into isolation to make sure this doesn't happen again, enslaved on an alien planet, not to mention everything with Thanos. And all the stress and trauma was so much for him that he even tried to end it all. Jen could have a little tact here. In the comics, Jen was supportive and caring, but here she comes off as entitled and selfish. I control my anger way more than you do, at least you're not a woman. My life is so much more difficult than yours. Is this supposed to be empowering? Seriously, what am I supposed to take away from this? She does it again in episode 2 with the Avengers. Her friend says that now she has these superpowers she could join the team, but she dismisses them as narcissist billionaires and orphans, while also questioning what kind of benefits come with being an Avenger, you know, like health insurance and maternity leave. Again, it's perfectly fine to bring up these kinds of topics, but there's no reason for her to put down the Avengers. These people have saved the world multiple times at the risk of their own health and well-being. Some of them even sacrificed their lives so that others can continue to live, and Jen has the nerve to put them down. She acts like her problems and issues are the only ones that matter, when she's had very very little hardship in her life. She's dealing with things like student loans and being catcalled, which suck, but don't hold a candle to most of the Avengers, who have dealt with serious trauma and even torture from a very young age. Even Captain America, who they kind of mock in the series. I guess Jen has a crush on him because she speculates about his love life and has a lock screen of his butt, but he grew up sickly in an abusive household, then he got experimented on and went to war, then he got flung into the future, losing everything he ever knew and loved, but he and everybody else are just billionaire narcissist orphans. Normally I wouldn't compare characters' traumas and challenges, but she herself is doing it. It would be fine if this was a character flaw that Jen needed to overcome, but the show seems to back her up to the point where it feels like it doesn't seem to understand that this is a character flaw. Honestly, I found her original portrayal in the comics way more empowering. She smashes her would-be murderers into the dirt, gets them to confess their crimes in front of the cops, and then she goes on to have a successful career, both as a lawyer and as a superhero, being a valuable member of multiple teams including the Avengers, and earning her place as an icon. Sure, she has her flaws and struggles, but she works to overcome those. But this Jen is just so rude and not very compelling. I wish the show had been more considerate when it came to the writing, whether it's with the characters, the topics they try to address, and the history of these characters, both in and out of the MCU. It clearly didn't make this show for comic book fans, but I also feel like it's not a good introduction to She-Hulk for people who aren't familiar with the character either. But this is definitely not everything I was hoping for when I was envisioning a She-Hulk movie all those years ago. Jen deserves better, but that's my opinion. What do you guys think? Do you like this show? Or would you have preferred something closer to her comics? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, everyone. I really appreciate it. Before I go, I want to give a shout out to our channel's members: Stutania, Tyrant Carnivore, Adam K, Shiny Orc Boy, The Rabbit Mancer, General Bolivar, Depth Charge Media, Samaru163, Gabby Hime, Sandy Martin, Verdant Range, Butcher7 Actual, Dash Hound, JVR, Hussyman42, Nixel, Eric Griffin, Phil C, Taylor Ramirez, Caleb Nelson, Bandito Bane, Hunter Rose, Dakari the Professor, Equestron, and Owen Wildish. Thank you all so much for your support. If you'd like to become a member, you can hit the join button next to the subscribe button. We also have a buy me coffee if you want to support us that way. But if you enjoyed this video, you can leave a like and subscribe to the channel, which helps us out a lot too, and it's free. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye for now.